Racist woman throws coffee at black shopper, then finds out he owns the mall. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Karen strode into the grocery store with the air of someone who believed the world revolved around her. Dressed in an expensive leather jacket and clutching a steaming cup of coffee, she glared at the people around her as if their mere presence was an inconvenience. The employees behind the counter exchanged wary glances, recognizing her immediately. Karen was a regular at the store, but not a welcome one. Her visits were always accompanied by complaints, demands, and a general sense of entitlement. "Excuse me, miss," Karen barked at a young employee stacking shelves. The girl flinched and turned to her, clutching a can of soup in one hand. "Do you expect me to dig through all this just to find the brand I want? Honestly, the service here is appalling." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the employee said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can help you find it." "You should have done that before I had to ask," Karen snapped, her tone dripping with disdain. She didn't wait for a response and marched toward the produce aisle, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. At the other end of the store, Marcus was browsing the shelves, his movements unhurried and deliberate. Tall and well-dressed in a crisp button-up shirt, Marcus exuded a quiet confidence. He was here on his lunch break, picking up a few things for dinner later. Unlike Karen, Marcus moved through the store with a sense of calm, greeting employees with a friendly nod and smile. As Marcus rounded a corner, pushing his cart toward the dairy section, Karen appeared from the opposite direction. Her cart, piled high with groceries, blocked most of the aisle, but she seemed oblivious. Marcus slowed his pace, maneuvering carefully to avoid bumping into her. But just as he passed, Karen turned sharply, her cart veering into his path. The edge of Marcus's cart brushed hers, making a soft clinking noise. Karen froze, her eyes narrowing as she looked up at him. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, her voice loud enough to turn heads. Marcus stopped immediately, his expression calm but concerned. "I'm so sorry," Marcus said sincerely. "I didn't mean to bump your cart." Karen's glare deepened. "You didn't mean to? That's all you have to say? You people are always so careless, thinking you own the place." Marcus's brow furrowed slightly, taken aback by her words. "I really am sorry," he said again, his tone patient. "It was an accident. Accident or not, you need to be more careful." Karen's voice rose, drawing more attention. A few shoppers nearby exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tension. Marcus started to step aside, hoping to de-escalate the situation, but Karen wasn't finished. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes still locked on him, and then, without warning, she hurled the cup in his direction. The coffee splattered across Marcus's shirt and chest, the hot liquid soaking into the fabric. Gasps echoed through the aisle as shoppers stopped in their tracks, horrified by what they had just witnessed. Marcus flinched slightly at the impact but remained remarkably composed, his expression one of calm disbelief. "You need to learn your place," Karen hissed, her voice venomous. "Maybe that'll teach you to respect people like me." For a moment there was silence, the kind that felt heavy and unbearable. Then the murmurs began. "Did she really just do that?" someone whispered. "That's disgusting behavior," another voice said. A man pulled out his phone, discreetly recording the aftermath. Marcus looked down at his soaked shirt, the dark stain spreading across the light fabric. He reached for a napkin from a nearby display, dabbing at the mess without saying a word. His restraint was almost unnerving, a sharp contrast to Karen's explosive anger. A middle-aged woman nearby stepped forward hesitantly. "Are you okay?" she asked Marcus, her voice gentle. Marcus nodded, offering her a small, polite smile. "I'm fine, thank you." Karen rolled her eyes, waving dismissively at the growing crowd. "Oh, give me a break," she said loudly. "He's acting like I threw acid on him. It's just coffee. He should be thankful it wasn't worse." The woman who had spoken up turned to Karen, her expression incredulous. "Thankful? You threw hot coffee at him for no reason. That's assault." Karen scoffed. "Oh, please, Don't make this into something it's not. People like him always try to play the victim. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of outrage and disbelief. More people began recording the scene on their phones, capturing Karen's every word and movement. She seemed oblivious to the cameras, too caught up in her indignation to realize how badly she was coming across. Marcus, meanwhile, finished wiping his shirt and looked directly at Karen. His gaze was steady, unflinching, and carried a quiet strength that made Karen falter for just a moment. "I'm sorry you feel the need to treat people this way," Marcus said evenly. "I hope one day you realize how much harm words and actions like yours can cause." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, a voice interrupted her. "What's going on here?" The store manager approached, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. He looked at Marcus, then at Karen, noting the spilled coffee and the tension in the air. "This man bumped into me," Karen said quickly, pointing at Marcus as if that explained everything. "And he was being rude, so I told him off." The manager's eyes narrowed slightly. "And the coffee on his shirt? How did that happen?" Karen hesitated for a split second before straightening her posture. "It slipped out of my hand. Accidents happen." The crowd's collective murmur of disbelief grew louder. One of the bystanders spoke up. "That's not what happened. She threw it at him on purpose. I've got it on video." The manager's jaw tightened as he turned back to Karen. "Is that true?" Karen's face turned red, but she refused to back down. "I don't see why it matters. He was being difficult, and I handled it." The manager shook his head, clearly appalled. "That's not how we treat people here, ma'am. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Karen's mouth fell open in shock. "Leave? Are you serious? I'm the victim here." But the manager wasn't budging. "You're causing a disturbance, and your behavior is unacceptable. Please leave the store." As Karen reluctantly gathered her belongings, grumbling under her breath, Marcus quietly walked away, his composure intact. The crowd parted to let him pass, many offering him apologetic looks or words of support. Outside the store, Marcus was met by a sharply dressed man who greeted him with a warm smile. "Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry for what just happened. Are you all right?" Marcus nodded, his calm demeanor unshaken. "I'm fine, James. Thank you." The man, James, was the general manager of the mall. He glanced back toward the grocery store, his expression darkening. "Do you want me to handle this?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. I want to see how far this goes." Unbeknownst to Karen, she had just humiliated and assaulted the owner of the entire mall. A man who held the power to determine not only her access to the property, but also the future of the businesses within it. Karen stormed out of the grocery store, her face flushed with anger and indignation. She couldn't believe the audacity of the manager to ask her to leave. "Ridiculous," she muttered under her breath. "All because some guy can't watch where he's going." As she pushed her shopping cart toward her car, the crowd inside the store remained abuzz with conversation. Several people watched as Karen exited, shaking their heads at her brazen attitude. Videos of the incident were already being shared online, and the whispers of Karen's actions were quickly spreading. Meanwhile, Marcus and James, the mall's general manager, stood near the fountain in the central atrium. Marcus's shirt was still stained from the coffee, but his calm demeanor hadn't wavered. James handed him a fresh shirt he had retrieved from a nearby store. "Here, sir. I thought you might want to change," James said. "Thank you, James," Marcus replied, taking the shirt. "It's unfortunate this had to happen here, but I suppose situations like this always serve as reminders." James nodded. "Reminders of how much work still needs to be done." "Are you sure you don't want to address her directly?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. Let her think she's gotten away with it. People like her never reflect unless they're faced with the consequences of their actions. I'll take care of it in due time." As Marcus changed into the clean shirt, James glanced toward the grocery store, where the employees were still talking among themselves. "Should I notify the store manager of your plans?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Not yet. I want this to unfold naturally. Let's see how she handles herself now that the spotlight's on her." Back in the parking lot, Karen loaded her groceries into her car, fuming. She noticed a couple walking by, staring at her as if they recognized her. "What are you looking at?" she snapped, slamming her trunk shut. The couple exchanged a glance but said nothing, walking away quickly. Karen didn't realize that the video of her throwing coffee at Marcus was already making waves on social media. By the time she drove out of the parking lot, hashtags like #coffeethrower and #justiceformarcus were trending. Unaware of the growing outrage, Karen decided to treat herself to a latte from the mall's cafe. She strutted into the coffee shop, ordering her usual drink, her confidence returning now that she was away from the scene. But as she waited for her order, she noticed a group of teenagers whispering and pointing in her direction. "What's their problem?" Karen muttered, rolling her eyes. She grabbed her coffee and walked toward the exit, feeling the weight of their stares. Meanwhile, Marcus walked into the grocery store again, this time with James at his side. The manager, who had witnessed the incident earlier, rushed to greet them, looking flustered. "Mr. Carter, I want to apologize for what happened earlier," the manager said. "We had no idea she would cause such a scene." Marcus raised a hand, signaling for him to stop. "There's no need to apologize on behalf of someone else's behavior," he said calmly. "However, I would like to discuss how the situation was handled." The manager nodded quickly, gesturing toward his office. "Of course. Please, this way." Inside the office, Marcus and James sat across from the manager, who looked nervous. "What do you plan to do about this?" Marcus asked, his tone measured but firm. "Well," the manager began, "we've already banned her from the store for the time being, and we're reviewing the incident to see if further action is necessary." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Good. But this isn't just about banning one customer. This is about ensuring that incidents like this don't happen again. Not just here, but in the entire mall." The manager nodded, taking notes. "Understood, sir. We'll coordinate with mall security to review our policies and make sure our staff is prepared to handle situations like this in the future." Satisfied, Marcus stood. "Thank you. I'll be keeping an eye on how this unfolds." As Marcus left the office, he noticed several shoppers approaching him hesitantly. One woman, the same person who had stepped in during the incident, spoke up. "Excuse me," she said. "I just wanted to say I'm so sorry for what happened earlier." That woman was completely out of line. Marcus smiled warmly. "Thank you. It means a lot to know there are people who stand up for what's right." The woman nodded. "You handled it so gracefully. I hope she learns her lesson." "Oh," Marcus said, his smile turning slightly mischievous. "She will." Karen, now sipping her latte, decided to browse the mall for a bit. She walked into a high-end clothing store, where the staff greeted her with polite smiles. But as she moved through the racks, she noticed two employees whispering nearby, their eyes darting toward her. Karen's temper flared. "Is there something you'd like to say?" she snapped, her voice sharp. The employees exchanged nervous glances. "No, ma'am," one of them said quickly. Karen huffed and continued browsing, but her irritation only grew. It seemed like everyone was staring at her today. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As she exited the store, she noticed more people glancing at her and whispering. Finally, her curiosity got the better of her. She pulled out her phone and opened her social media feed. Her jaw dropped as she saw the flood of notifications and comments. The video of her throwing coffee at Marcus had gone viral. Hundreds of comments poured in, condemning her actions. Words like racist, entitled, and disgusting were repeated over and over. Karen's hands shook as she scrolled through the endless stream of criticism. She couldn't believe it. Her face was everywhere, her actions exposed for the world to see. "This can't be happening," she muttered, her heart racing. "It's just a misunderstanding." But deep down, Karen knew it was more than that. The video didn't lie, and neither did her own behavior. For the first time, she felt a pang of fear that her actions might have real consequences. While Karen grappled with the fallout, Marcus was busy finalizing plans for a meeting with the mall's leadership team. He wanted to use the incident as an opportunity to address not only Karen's behavior, but also the broader issue of creating a more inclusive and respectful environment within the mall. The meeting was scheduled for the next day, and Marcus made sure to include representatives from the grocery store, mall security, and other key departments. He wanted everyone to understand the importance of what had happened and how it would shape the mall's future policies. The following morning, Karen woke up to dozens of missed calls and messages. Her friends, family, and even coworkers had seen the video, and the backlash was growing. She decided to go to the mall, hoping to speak to someone who could clear up the misunderstanding. As she entered the mall, she noticed the atmosphere had changed. People gave her cold looks, and some even whispered as she walked by. Karen felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She made her way to the grocery store, determined to speak with the manager. But before she could get far, she was stopped by a security guard. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me," he said firmly. Karen froze. "Why? What's going on?" The guard didn't answer, simply gesturing for her to follow. Reluctantly, Karen complied, her nerves growing with each step. The security guard led Karen to a conference room where Marcus, James, and several other mall officials were seated. Karen's eyes widened as she recognized Marcus, now dressed impeccably in a tailored suit. "You," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Marcus met her gaze calmly. "I'm the owner of this mall," he said evenly. "And we need to have a conversation about your behavior." Karen's mouth opened and closed as she struggled to process his words. "Owner," she repeated weakly. Marcus nodded. "Yes. The man you threw coffee at and humiliated in front of a crowd owns this entire mall." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Karen's face turned pale, her bravado crumbling under the pressure. Karen sat frozen in her chair, her mind racing as she processed Marcus's words. The man she had publicly humiliated, the man she had thrown coffee at, owned the very mall she was now sitting in. Her carefully constructed confidence shattered, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his calm yet authoritative demeanor filling the room. "Karen, let me make one thing clear," he began. "What happened yesterday wasn't just an unfortunate incident. It was a display of disrespect, entitlement, and prejudice." Karen fidgeted in her seat, unable to meet his gaze. I didn't mean for it to escalate like that," she stammered. "I was just having a bad day." "A bad day?" Marcus repeated, his voice even but firm. "A bad day doesn't justify throwing coffee at someone or hurling insults. A bad day doesn't give you the right to treat others as less than." The tension in the room was palpable. The other mall officials and store representatives watched in silence, their expressions a mix of disbelief and disapproval. "I'm sorry," Karen said quickly, her tone defensive. "I didn't realize who you were." Marcus's eyebrows raised slightly. "And if I weren't the owner of this mall, would your behavior have been any different?" Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. She knew the answer, and so did everyone else in the room. Her silence spoke volumes. James, the mall's general manager, cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Karen, the issue here isn't just about what you did to Mr. Carter. It's about the broader impact of your actions. Your behavior was witnessed by dozens of people, many of whom recorded it and shared it online. The mall has received an overwhelming amount of feedback from the public, condemning what happened." Karen's face turned red, a mix of embarrassment and frustration. "But it's just one incident," she blurted out. "Why is everyone blowing this out of proportion?" James shook his head. "It's not just one incident, Karen. It's a reflection of attitudes and behaviors that we as a community cannot tolerate. This mall prides itself on being a welcoming space for everyone. Your actions undermined that." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't just about you, Karen. It's about the message we send as a mall and as a community. People come here to shop, to relax, to feel safe. Your actions created the opposite." Karen looked around the room, searching for any sign of support, but found none. The officials' faces were stern, and even the store manager, who had initially tried to defuse the situation, avoided her gaze. Marcus took a deep breath before continuing. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his tone resolute. "First, you are banned from this mall, effective immediately. We cannot allow anyone to disrupt the environment of inclusivity and respect we are working to maintain." Karen's eyes widened in shock. "Banned? You can't do that." "I can, and I am," Marcus said firmly. "Second, the grocery store where the incident took place will be implementing additional inclusivity training for all staff. While this doesn't directly involve you, it's part of a larger effort to ensure that everyone, regardless of race, background, or circumstances, is treated with dignity." Karen's hands balled into fists in her lap, but she didn't dare protest further. The power dynamic in the room was unmistakable, and she knew she was out of options. Finally, Marcus added, his voice softening slightly, "I hope you take this opportunity to reflect on your actions. Change doesn't happen unless we're willing to confront our own behavior and learn from our mistakes." After the meeting, Karen was escorted out of the mall by security. As she walked through the bustling corridors, she felt the weight of countless stares. The video of her actions had spread far and wide, and nearly everyone in the mall seemed to recognize her. Whispers followed her as she passed, each one a reminder of her public downfall. By the time she reached her car, Karen's confidence had completely crumbled. She sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel tightly as tears streamed down her face. For the first time, she began to feel the full weight of what she had done, not just to Marcus but to herself. Inside the mall, Marcus and James regrouped in the general manager's office. James looked at Marcus, his expression one of admiration. "You handled that better than I ever could," he said. Marcus shook his head. "It's not about handling it, James. It's about setting an example. If we don't hold people accountable, nothing changes." James nodded in agreement. "What's next?" "I assume the video's momentum online is still growing." "It is," Marcus replied, "and that's something we can use for good. Let's turn this moment into an opportunity to promote the values we stand for as a mall. We can launch an inclusivity campaign, something that celebrates diversity and reminds people that this is a place for everyone." James smiled. "I like that idea. We could involve the local community, maybe host events or workshops." Marcus nodded, his mind already racing with ideas. "Let's start planning. This isn't just about damage control. It's about building something better." The mall's inclusivity campaign launched 2 weeks later, accompanied by a powerful slogan, "Together, we belong." Posters and banners were placed throughout the mall, featuring images of diverse families, friends, and individuals, all smiling and enjoying their time together. The campaign also included a series of workshops and events, ranging from cultural celebrations to discussions on combating prejudice. Marcus personally hosted a few of these events, sharing his story and encouraging others to speak up against discrimination. One of the most impactful events was a panel discussion on inclusivity in business, featuring local leaders and activists. Marcus sat on the panel, his calm yet commanding presence drawing the audience in. "Change starts with each of us," Marcus said during the discussion. "It starts with how we treat the people around us, how we stand up for what's right, and how we hold ourselves accountable. This mall isn't just a place to shop. It's a place to connect, to learn, and to grow." The audience erupted into applause, moved by his words. For many, Marcus had become a symbol of resilience and leadership, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, progress was possible. As the campaign continued, the mall thrived like never before. Foot traffic increased, and businesses reported higher sales, driven in part by the positive publicity surrounding the inclusivity initiatives. Patrons felt a renewed sense of pride in the mall, knowing it stood for something greater than commerce. Karen, meanwhile, found herself grappling with the consequences of her actions. Her ban from the mall was only the beginning. The viral video had made her a target of public scrutiny, and she faced backlash from friends, family, and even her employer. Karen's life, once filled with entitlement and privilege, had been turned upside down. At first, she resisted taking responsibility, blaming everyone but herself for her situation. But as weeks turned into months, The constant criticism forced her to confront the truth. Slowly, Karen began to reflect on her actions and the attitudes that had led her there. She reached out to a local organization that focused on educating people about racial bias and discrimination, hoping to learn and grow from her mistakes. It was a humbling experience, but one that marked the beginning of her journey towards self-awareness. Months later, Marcus walked through the mall, now adorned with decorations for the holiday season. The air was filled with the sound of cheerful music and the laughter of children. He paused near the central fountain, taking in the vibrant atmosphere. "Mr. Carter," a voice called out. Marcus turned to see the same woman who had stood up for him during the coffee incident. She smiled warmly, holding a shopping bag in one hand. "I just wanted to thank you again for everything you've done. This mall feels different now." "Better." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you. That means a lot to me." As the woman walked away, Marcus looked around the mall, his chest filling with pride. What had started as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a movement of change, a reminder that even the darkest moments could lead to light. As the holiday season reached its peak, the mall was alive with energy. Families bustled from store to store, their laughter and conversations filling the air. The Inclusivity campaign had become a defining feature of the mall, with holiday-themed events celebrating diverse traditions and cultures. Marcus watched it all from his office window, a satisfied smile on his face. This was the vision he had always dreamed of, a place where everyone, regardless of their background, could feel welcome. The mall's transformation had not gone unnoticed. Media outlets picked up on the story, hailing Marcus's leadership and the mall's Inclusivity campaign as a model for other businesses. Marcus had received countless emails and letters from people inspired by his actions, many of whom shared their own stories of facing discrimination and adversity. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from a young Black entrepreneur who had recently opened a small business in the mall. "You've shown me that success isn't just about profit. It's about using your platform to make a difference," the letter read. "Thank you for setting an example I can look up to." Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, alongside other notes of encouragement he had received. Each one reminded him of why he had taken a stand that day and why the fight for inclusivity was worth every challenge. One chilly evening, Marcus decided to take a walk through the mall. He liked to see things from the perspective of the patrons, to experience the space as they did. As he strolled past the fountain and into the main atrium, he spotted a familiar face. Karen. She was sitting on a bench near the holiday display, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She wasn't alone. Beside her sat a volunteer from the local bias education program, a woman Marcus recognized from one of the workshops. Karen's face looked different, softer, quieter. She was listening intently as the volunteer spoke, occasionally nodding or jotting something down in a notebook. Karen looked up and met Marcus's gaze. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then, to his surprise, she stood and walked toward him, her movements hesitant but purposeful. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Do you have a moment?" Marcus nodded, his expression neutral. Of course, Karen hesitated, her eyes searching his face for a reaction. "I wanted to apologize, properly this time. What I did that day was inexcusable. I was angry and frustrated, but none of that justifies how I treated you. I've been doing a lot of reflecting, and I realize now how much harm my actions caused." Marcus studied her for a moment, noting the genuine regret in her eyes. "It takes courage to admit when you've been wrong," he said finally. "But the real test is what you do moving forward." Karen nodded, her grip tightening on the coffee cup in her hands. "I've started working with a local organization to educate myself about bias and prejudice. It's been eye-opening. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm committed to doing better." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "That's a good start. Growth isn't easy, but it's necessary. I hope you stay on that path." Karen smiled faintly, a mix of relief and gratitude on her face. "Thank you. And again, I'm sorry." With that, she turned and walked back to the bench, resuming her conversation with the volunteer. Marcus watched her for a moment before continuing his walk. He didn't know what the future held for Karen, but he was glad to see her taking responsibility for her actions. As the weeks passed, the mall continued to thrive. The inclusivity campaign evolved into a permanent initiative, with regular events and workshops aimed at fostering understanding and respect. The staff underwent ongoing training, and Marcus made it a point to stay involved, attending meetings and events to ensure the mall remained true to its mission. One day, Marcus received a call from a national business association. They were organizing a conference on leadership and inclusivity in the corporate world and wanted him to be a keynote speaker. "We've been following your story and the changes you've implemented at the mall," the organizer said. "Your approach is inspiring, and we believe your insights could help other business leaders create more inclusive environments." Marcus agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to expand the impact of his work. At the conference, he stood before a packed audience of CEOs, managers, and entrepreneurs, sharing his experiences and the lessons he had learned. "Inclusivity isn't just a buzzword or a box to check," Marcus said, his voice steady and confident. "It's about creating spaces where everyone feels valued and respected. It's about recognizing that diversity isn't a challenge to overcome. It's a strength to embrace." The audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Marcus felt a swell of pride, knowing that his message was reaching people far beyond the walls of his mall. Back at the mall, the ripple effects of Marcus's leadership were evident. The businesses flourished, the community grew stronger, and the patrons felt a renewed sense of belonging. The mall had become more than just a place to shop. It was a symbol of progress, resilience, and hope. One afternoon, Marcus stood by the fountain, watching as children played near the water while their parents chatted nearby. A young girl ran up to him, holding a candy cane she had received from a holiday event. "Are you the boss of the mall?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Marcus chuckled, kneeling to her level. "I guess you could say that." The girl grinned. "This place is the best. My mom says it's because you made it special." Marcus's smile widened. "I'm glad you think so, but it's not just me. It's everyone here who makes it special." The girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood the weight of his words. Then she ran off to join her friends, her laughter echoing through the atrium. As the evening settled in, Marcus took one last walk through the mall before heading home. The lights twinkled brightly, and the sound of cheerful music filled the air. He paused near the entrance, taking in the sight of the bustling space. This was what he had worked for. Not just a successful mall, but a place where people felt seen, respected, and valued. A place where differences were celebrated, not feared. Marcus knew there would always be challenges ahead, moments where progress felt slow or resistance felt overwhelming. But he also knew that every step forward, no matter how small, was worth it. As he left the mall that night, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. Not just for the mall, but for everyone who had been a part of its story. And the best part? The journey was far from over. A few weeks later, the mall's inclusivity campaign culminated in a community celebration, a festival designed to highlight the diversity of the neighborhood. The atrium was transformed into a vibrant hub of activity, with food stalls representing cuisines from around the world, live performances from local artists, and booths where organizations shared resources on community building and inclusivity. Marcus stood near the stage, watching as a group of children performed a traditional dance. The crowd clapped along to the rhythm, their faces alight with joy. It was moments like these that reminded him why he had taken such a firm stand after the incident with Karen. This wasn't just about fixing one person's behavior, it was about creating a ripple effect that would inspire an entire community to do better. As the performance ended, Marcus stepped onto the stage to address the crowd. The applause was deafening as he approached the microphone, his presence commanding yet approachable. "Thank you all for being here today," Marcus began, his voice carrying easily over the chatter of the audience. "When we started this campaign, our goal was simple: to create a space where everyone feels like they belong. But as I stand here today, looking at all of you, I realize we've done more than that. We've built a community." He paused, letting the words sink in. What happened here a few months ago was a painful reminder of the work we still have to do. But it was also an opportunity to come together, to learn, and to grow. And I am so proud of how we've risen to that challenge. The crowd erupted into cheers, many people raising their hands in solidarity. Marcus smiled, the weight of his journey momentarily lifting as he felt the support of the community surrounding him. As the festival continued, Marcus took the time to walk through the event, stopping to chat with vendors and visitors. Many people approached him to share their gratitude and admiration for what he had accomplished. One woman, a teacher at a local high school, introduced herself. "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done. Your story has been such an inspiration to my students. We even had a discussion in class about the importance of standing up to discrimination." Marcus's eyes lit up. "That means a lot to me," he said. "What did your students think about the discussion?" The woman smiled. They were passionate. They shared stories about times they felt excluded or seen others being treated unfairly. Your story helped them realize that they have the power to make a difference. Hearing that brought a deep sense of fulfillment to Marcus. He had always believed in the power of stories to change hearts and minds, and knowing that his experience had sparked important conversations was more than he could have hoped for. Toward the end of the day, Marcus spotted a familiar face weaving through the crowd, Karen. She wasn't alone this time. She was accompanied by a group of volunteers from the Bias Education Program. Karen's demeanor was different now, no longer brash and entitled, but subdued and thoughtful. She hesitated when she saw Marcus, her gaze flickering with uncertainty. Finally, she approached him, her steps tentative but deliberate. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "I wasn't sure if I should come today, but the program leaders encouraged me to. I just wanted to say thank you, not just for giving me a second chance, but for showing me what real leadership looks like." Marcus regarded her for a moment, noting the genuine humility in her tone. "Karen, change is never easy," he said, "but the fact that you're here, willing to learn and grow, says a lot about the progress you've made." Karen nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to doing the work. I want to be better. Not just for myself, but for the people I've hurt." Marcus extended his hand, offering a small smile. "Then keep going. The journey is worth it." Karen shook his hand, a look of gratitude on her face. For Marcus, the moment wasn't about redemption. It was about the possibility of change. If Karen could reflect on her actions and choose a different path, perhaps others could too. As the festival drew to a close, Marcus found himself back at the fountain, the heart of the mall. The decorations sparkled under the soft glow of the evening lights, casting a warm, inviting atmosphere over the space. Families lingered, children laughed, and the sound of music drifted softly through the air. James approached him, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa. "Here," he said, handing one to Marcus. "You've earned this." Marcus chuckled, taking the cup. "Thanks, James. It's been quite a day." James gestured to the bustling crowd. "Look at this place. This is what you've built, Marcus. Not just a mall, but a community. A place where people feel like they belong." Marcus nodded, his gaze sweeping over the atrium. "It wasn't just me. It was everyone who believed in the vision. Everyone who stood up and said, 'We can do better.'" James smiled. "Still, you led the way. And that's something to be proud of." Marcus sipped his cocoa, the warmth spreading through him. Pride wasn't something he often allowed himself to dwell on. But in that moment, he felt it. A quiet, deep pride in what they had accomplished together. As the night wore on, Marcus stayed behind to help clean up, chatting with the staff and volunteers who had made the event possible. By the time he left the mall, the atrium was quiet again, the lights dimmed but still glowing softly. Marcus paused at the entrance, taking one last look at the space that had come to mean so much to him. The journey to this moment hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every challenge, every setback, every hard decision. He stepped outside, the cool night air greeting him as he walked to his car. Overhead, the stars sparkled against the dark sky, a reminder of the vastness of the world and the infinite possibilities it held. For Marcus, the journey wasn't over. There was still work to be done, still barriers to break and lessons to teach. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, a moment to reflect on how far they had come and how much farther they could go. And as he drove away, the glow of the mall fading into the distance, Marcus carried with him the knowledge that change was possible, and that one person, standing firm in their values, could inspire an entire community to rise.